the acidification of the world's oceans, and what's worse than an oil spill. A year ago, the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig exploded, gushing at least 5 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico before it was finally capped 3 months later. It was, by most accounts, a major disaster. When it comes to wrecking our oceans, the accidental BP spill was small compared with the damage we do with intent and ignorance. Say, two men who specialize in ocean affairs, Carl Safina, the author of A Sea in Flames and the president of the Blue Ocean Institute, and Ted Danson, who recently published Oceana, the book, and is a board member of Oceana, the conservation organization he helped found. As Safina said, many people believe the whole catastrophe is the oil we spill, but that gets diluted and eventually disarmed over time. In fact, the oil we don't spill, the oil we collect, refine, and use, produces CO2 and other gases that don't get diluted. That CO2 and other gases, of course, leads to global warming and climate change, or whatever one might call it, as well as what's called ocean acidification, which might be thought of as oceanic global warming and is a greater catastrophe than any spill to date. The oceans absorb approximately 30% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, creating carbonic acid. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, we've added about 500 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide to the oceans, on top of everything else we've added to it, which are 30% more acidic than they were a couple of hundred years ago. This acidification makes it difficult for calcifying organisms, coral, snails and oysters and other mollusks, and more, to build shells and skeletons sturdy enough for them to survive. Many of these are on the bottom of the food chain, and as they begin to die off, we've already seen massive oyster declines on the Pacific coast. The effects trickle up. Acidification has already wreaked havoc on coral reefs, on which approximately 25% of all marine life depends. By the end of this century, Safina says the ocean will begin dissolving coral reefs and everything else unless we make a big change in our fossil fuel use. In other words, the oceans could die and be devoid of all life. And if acidic oceans endanger marine life leisurely, fishing does it quickly. Around 70% of global fish stocks are fully or overfished, and 30% have collapsed, which means they produce less than 10% of their original capacity. Commercial fish catch has declined by some 500,000 tons per year since 1998, not for lack of effort, money, or technology. In fact, because of those factors, but for lack of fish. The danger becomes dual, says Danson. If you're overfishing at the top of the food chain and acidifying the ocean at the bottom, you're creating a squeeze that could conceivably collapse the whole system. There is some hope in the overfishing department, and strangely enough, the Gulf is an example of this. When huge areas were closed to fishing during the oil spill, many fish stocks rebounded. As Safina, who is clearly no fan of oil spills, says, if you ask the fish whether they'd rather have an oil spill or a season of fishing, I wouldn't be surprised if they'd vote for another blowout. We've seen this before. Fish stocks boomed during World War II when the North Atlantic was not a safe place to be. This is why marine reserves, areas where no fishing is allowed, make so much sense. The United States is strong on combating overfishing and fisheries management, establishing quotas or even moratoriums on certain species, and in adjusting those subsidies that encourage industrial fishing, that which uses the most damaging methods like bottom trawling and is responsible for horrific amounts of bycatch, the unintentional capture and wasting of non-target fish that is usually left for dead. 90% of the world's fishers, those who fish at subsistence level and just above, catch only 10% of the world's fish. Industrial and often subsidized ships bring in 90%. The World Trade Organization has been slowly moving towards stronger regulation of subsidies for industrial fishing, but very slowly. The reality is that a tremendous amount needs to change for our oceans and fish stocks to recover. Scary as it has been, the fishing fix seems at least imaginable if we create more marine sanctuaries, crack down on overfishing, and continue to pressure retailers to employ sustainable seafood policies. This last is especially encouraging. Greenpeace's annual report, Carting Away the Oceans, announced last week that 15 of 20 major U.S. food retailers had passing grades in their fish selling policies. This year, Safeway took the top spot and is poised to achieve Greenpeace's first good rating. When the first report was made in 2008, none of the stores received positive scores, and so that's progress. Yet ocean acidification looms, and for this there's only one solution: reducing carbon gases and other emissions. You do that by using less fossil fuel, by conservation or substitution, or both. On this front, the United States is behind the curve. We stand to lose a whole lot more than just coral. In other words, potentially, again, all life in the oceans could eventually be lost. This too is another sign of the times, the end times, transition days, which is a continuing day-by-day process of extraordinary changes, happenings, and events that are increasing in frequency. They are like warnings. What kind of world are we leaving to the future generations? Yes, the earth must be here for a long time to come. Daniel chapter 12. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which stands for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of troubles, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. 2. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. 3. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. Revelation chapter 15. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. 2. And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. 3. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. 4. Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name? For thou only art holy. For all nations shall come and worship before thee, for thy judgments are made manifest. 5. And after that I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened. 6. And the 7 angels came out of the temple, having the 7 plagues, clothed in pure and white linen, and having their breasts girded with golden girdles. 7. And one of the 4 beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials, full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. 8. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God, and from his power, and no human was able to enter into the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. Revelation chapter 8, verse 8. And the 2nd angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the 3rd part of the sea became as blood. 9. And the 3rd part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the 3rd part of the ships were destroyed. 10. And the 3rd angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. 11. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many humans died of the waters because they were made bitter. Yes, it's time for all prophecy to be fulfilled. Everything is connected, and everything is numbered. All these are more warnings and signs